Ogden's a small town. Trains used to come through here. They don't come here anymore. But then again, neither do the people.
Who are you talking to?
Engage.
This is, excuse me, a damn fine cup of coffee.
I am the one who knocks.
Hi, I'm Jessica K. Richards. I'm an academic who does television studies.
I'm Ashley Zanter, and I'm an academic who does cultural studies.
And I'm Scott Nielsen, and when I was 12 years old, I was the entire Josie and the Pussycats band for Halloween.
And we are UniversiTV.
Every other week, we talk about new shows that are in their first seasons. This week, we are talking about Riverdale, CW's new show based on the Archie comics, which follows just after the death of Jason Blossom, a young local teen who is brutally murdered, and the... What did we call it, guys?
Intrigue.
The intrigue and minimal stakes that follow.
Dun dun dun.
Yay!
Okay, so why don't we just start off this discussion by, I just wanted to ask you guys, what do you think the point of Riverdale is?
Okay, sorry. So I have some trouble with this show because it basically takes everything that I love about teen dramas that I hate and puts them all into one location. And so just the way that I look at this show and its significance, it's sort of just a messy mashup of all my favorite shows. And so I'm not really sure how to answer that particular question at this point, right?
So I'm going to agree in the sense that I don't think the show has a point. Typically in other shows we've talked about, like Atlanta is about conveying the black experience or exploring millennial blackness, or This Is Us is about exploring the bonds between family and what time and history has to do with it. Riverdale really just, I couldn't say that it has a point or a larger meaning. It's just sort of a weekly, like, murder mystery teen drama, make money for the CW because Supernatural has to end sometime.
Well, and I think that it is worth mentioning that, like, one of the goals of this podcast, or one of the things we're trying to do, is be able to unearth some of this stuff. Like, a lot of times people look at a teen drama, and by the way, like, teen dramas are my jam. That's what I do. Those are my favorites. Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Oh my God, here we go again.
Right? So, like, or Veronica Mars, which is also one of my very favorite shows, and which I kept I kept comparing this show to that show because they're basically, it's about a murder of a teen. It takes the whole season to solve the case. Like, there's a lot of parallelism between these couple kinds of shows. And so, but this show really had me grasping. Like, I didn't get it. I don't think I got this one. So, yeah, so that's been kind of that was a tough experience for me.
So for me, I think, and this is going to come across as really weird, I loved the show, just for the record. I'm not going to go into a lot of that right now, but I think the reason I liked it as much as I did is because it was just entertaining. Because I've seen so much television recently that's just heavy and hard and difficult and like a slog to get through. Even if it's good TV, it's just a slog to get through. And in this particular case, I was just engrossed by the narrative, and I watched it over a longer period of time. I didn't necessarily binge it, and I just really enjoyed coming back and being able to sort of suspend my disbelief in a way that didn't make me uncomfortable all the time.
Well, okay, and so this is part of the thing that I want to ask you. Like, what engrossed you about the narrative? Because for me, it seemed so disconnected most of the time that from episode to episode, I couldn't really, like, there weren't any threads that I could pull. It just felt like, it felt like it was taking a little bit from Glee, a little bit from Dawson's Creek, a little bit from Felicity, and smooshing it into the same place.
A lot of it from Twin Peaks.
A lot of it from Twin Peaks.
It's so I was talking to my girlfriend, who is a huge fan of Riverdale and a huge fan of Twin Peaks, and I was like, they're both like in these upper remote mountainous forest towns. There's a lot of fog. You find out that there's a lot of similarities in the murder. Like, it's kind of a ripoff.
Well, and even the sign at the beginning, right? Which is just, it's an absolute echo, right? An homage to Twin Peaks. Yeah. And that's what's so funny about this show is that it's attempting to kind of mimic these great television shows that had this, like, big cultural impact, but it tries to take so many of those pieces and push them into the same place.
It's basically the Frankenstein's monster of terrible TV drama.
But I think maybe that's why I liked it. I loved the mashing of the genres. I liked that it was a teen drama a la One Tree Hill. I liked that it was sort of this neo-noir. I liked that it was a little bit gothic and a little bit of a comedy. There's some really weirdly funny moments. It's also like I loved One Tree Hill. Like, I'm just going to put that on the table. And One Tree Hill, which is about, teenagers playing basketball in North Carolina in a high school and the drama that follows. It's, I just really enjoyed watching all of that stuff kind of get mishmashed together. And maybe it's just I'm having a knee-jerk reaction to finally watching something that doesn't depress the crap out of me. But I really enjoyed coming back to it and seeing
a commentary on the kinds of shows that we watch on this podcast.
Maybe just a little bit. But I don't know. I liked coming back to it, and I liked being able to be there and then leave and then not have it ruin my day.
Sure. Well, and I think it's interesting, right? Because we also have to remember that there's a very specific, very famous source material that this comes from, right? Mm-hmm. So I haven't read a lot of Archie comics, but I think everyone's very familiar. You got Archie, Betty, Veronica, Jughead. That's where Josie and the Pussycats come from. The thing's over 70 years old. So much of cartoons and comics have really come out from that. Stan Lee and Jack Kirby were involved at one point, comic royalty. And it almost seems unrecognizable from the source material. Mm-hmm. It seems like they've made a lot of divergent choices from it. And I know that Archie gets weird in times. They've done like where Archie gets killed or there's zombies. But this almost feels like they're like, this is hardcore Archie. This is Archie in like a hard universe. Like people die.
Except for, is it though? Right? So, like, part of the argument of the series is that there's this one kid who's died and, like, the whole innocence of the town comes into question as a result of it. And I guess for me, it was just kind of like, is Riverdale even really that messed up? It just sort of seemed too much like the high school ideal for it to be that way, right? Like, I couldn't, he was like, it's dark, it's gritty. The narrator, Jughead, the whole time he's just morose, reading this sort of script, his great novel. I'm putting that in air quotes for the audience. But it's one of those things where, like, I didn't actually ever feel the darkness. Mm-hmm.
He's weird, okay? He's weird. He never takes off his hat, okay?
I think maybe our age is showing a little bit here too, because I know it's hard to believe, especially if you look at the ages of some of the actors in this, but all of these kids are supposed to be 15. And, like, you look at KJ Apa, who plays Archie, and you look at Camila Mendez, who plays Veronica, and you look at all of these people, and they're clearly in their 20s. Like, 15-year-olds don't have abs like that. It doesn't happen. I don't care who you are. And when you're 15, things that aren't that dramatic are all of a sudden the biggest deal in the freaking universe. And I think that's where some of this is coming from. And so we're going at it, we're like, you got bullied a little bit? Is that hard? Is it that hard? And when you're 15, it sucks.
Well, but that's part of my other, like, challenge of the series here is that I don't really understand why any of the characters are invested in the central mystery, because they don't seem to have cared either about Cheryl Blossom, the sister of the victim, or Jason Blossom, the victim himself, very much at all this whole time. And so it's like, in other shows where I've seen a central figure get killed or murdered, there's a lot of connection to that victim. There's a lot of care that's centered on that. And in this show, I didn't ever get any feeling like, why did these particular kids care about this murder? Other than that it's... And in that way, they sort of end up looking kind of gross, if that makes sense.
Well, I mean, I think it varies. In the beginning of the show, they don't really care about it. But then Cheryl Blossom shows up and makes their lives living hell until they do care about it. But, like, I mean, Betty and Jughead are part of the investigative journalism club, and they do the paper, and
The Blue and Gold.
I'm sorry, what?
The Blue and Gold.
The Blue and Gold, of course. How could I forget? So they're invested a little bit. I'd say Archie's involvement is like, oh, I'm wearing Jason's new football number when he joins the football team, gets the same number as Jason, gives it to the mom. It becomes that they slowly become interweaved more until the big climax where Jughead's dad is accused of the murder, and then they have an active reason because someone they care about is accused of the murder. So,
but that takes like 10 episodes for us to have a reason. Like, so let's just say for a second here that Jughead's dad got arrested in episode 3 or even episode 2. And then there was this protracted conversation about a false confession. You know, like, there are whole television shows that hinge on that kind of tension. I just didn't understand any of the narrative tension in the show at all.
So I guess that didn't bother me as much, only because I really liked the choice to make Jason, the victim, a voiceless, personality-less, like, body. And the reason why is because, you know, as audiences, we're coming to this after he's been murdered. So if we're coming to this after he's been murdered and no one's having wonky dreams or visions, we don't know what he sounds like as the viewers. We don't know who he was except for what people say about him and the stuff you discover along the way. And it's sort of like experiencing all of this in real time. And I particularly liked that. I think that not knowing that about him made him more intriguing to me as a viewer.
But then why should we care?
Right. I think...
Because he's dead.
Right, but that's not enough to care. There's plenty of dead people I don't care about. William the Conqueror.
You should care about him.
No. But, like, for example, I'll bring back Twin Peaks. People care about Laura Palmer.
I don't.
Well, you're a monster. But because they show all the people around her and how much she meant to them, the only person that we see actually cared about Jason Blossom was Cheryl. And we all hate Cheryl because she's annoying and vacuous and vapid and horrible.
Disagree.
For the most part.
Well, and I think I did have some trouble, like, identifying or understanding the Cheryl character in the show, because again, she's supposed to be the mean girl that we see in, you know, like Tina Fey's comedy Mean Girls, or she's supposed to be, she felt like directly for me, like she was absolutely just lifted out of Glee and put in Riverdale, because all the stuff that comes out of her mouth are these like pop cultural references. And so
now I just can't stop thinking about the cheerleading battle they do.
Yeah, exactly.
Between Veronica. Yeah, the cheer off. That was the most surreal moment of the whole show.
So great.
For me.
So great. No, so I will. I like Cheryl. I'm not going to get into too many of the reasons why because I don't think they're necessarily important. But I will say that of the female characters in Riverdale, she's one of the less compelling ones for me. So, so I know this is a tenuous point, but I think that the feminism in the show is really interesting. I don't know that it's revelatory in any capacity, but I think it's really interesting how it's a show that's supposed to be based around a white dude, Archie, right? And the show ends up being driven almost exclusively by female characters.
Well, and I actually really did like that part of the show. I thought that was interesting. You know, at the very end of the season, when Betty gets up and gives the final speech to the town to sort of rally them and question their motives and all of that, that was really moving, and I thought that was really awesome. Instead of it being the focus on Archie's dumb love song about friendship, like,
he's not a good musician. The show says he is. He's not.
So that was actually really nice. That was a nice moment. And I think they did that a couple of different times throughout the show. I think one of the things that does problematize the feminism of the show is definitely the ways that, you know, the Archie comics themselves are not a feminist property, right? They're about objectifying various kinds of women, the angel of the house versus the, you know, the harlot, and you know, offering these two options up to a white male protagonist, and so I think that is still problematic and I think that's why we feel like Riverdale's a little bit more feminist than it is, because it takes a property that was inherently misogynistic and turns it into slightly less
well, it's interesting.
misogyny, right? So
it's interesting because I think it's a feminist property in the sense of it's not feminist, right? Like, it's nice because Betty and Veronica in particular actualize their own desires. They see a problem and they work to fix it themselves. They don't require outside aid from a man. They actively take part in their own destiny, which is a big part of being a feminist work. But I also think they're a little self-aware, where they're like, oh, are we passing the Bechdel test? Where it's like, okay, cheeky dialogue, you're meta, cool, have fun. It just seems like
Well,
And-
and that. Oh, go ahead.
No,
Ash.
so I was just going to say, I agree with you. I think that, I wouldn't say this is a feminist work of art. Like, that's not what I'm trying to get at. But I think that what sort of puts it over the bar for me in terms of being more feminist than not feminist is that the men in the show are particularly useless in a way that I'm not used to seeing. So Archie, and like, if we're going to talk about vacuous and vapid, like, my music, guys, my music. I need to talk about my music. Like, he is so annoying and empty. Like, he is an empty vessel of a character if I've ever seen one. He is abs and red hair, and like, that is what he's there for. And you've got Jughead, who to some extent you could argue is sort of a moral compass in the show. We're sort of getting mediated through him.
He is the narrator.
Yeah, but he is a cliche.
He's also a sidekick.
Yeah, he is probably one of the most cliche characters in the show. And then you've got the dad, who's kind of pointless. He tries
Which
to do.
dad are you talking
Oh,
about?
I'm sorry, Archie's dad.
Yeah.
Archie's dad, played by Luke Perry. He tries to do things. He tries to enact, like, he tries to create action around him. And I feel like every time he's on screen, nothing happens.
Right. But to be fair, all of the parents are pretty useless.
Yes.
Like, it's incredible to me that in this narrative world, it's basically like Scooby-Doo, because a couple of teenagers with some plucky luck can solve a murder that a police department can't. Mm-hmm. And I think, like, so Archie's dad is useless.
Yes.
Veronica's mom is destructive and detrimental.
Yep.
Betty's mom is a horrific monster who, well, I mean, she's pretty bad. Like,
I
she
would
sends
say
her daughter.
She's pretty damaged.
Yes,
So-
and she's very, very passive aggressive and
Yes.
manipulative.
Mm-hmm.
So think of it this way. So Betty's dad sends their older daughter, Polly, who is pregnant with Jason Blossom's child.
Oh, by the way, we're spoiling everything in this show.
I wouldn't call it spoiling.
Right.
We're just letting you know what happened.
The plot is the whole show in this particular.
So they know. Spoiler warnings abound. But anyway, yeah, so they send her off to some communal nunnery to learn how to be better. Now, the dad is like, I know the deep, dark secret that we are actually, the Coopers and the Blossoms are the same family. Hatfield McCoy, the feud between the Coopers and the Blossoms. I have this deep, dark secret. So his actions, while horrific, are a little bit more motivated. She just sends her daughter off to a nunnery.
Well, okay.
Hashtag incest baby.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and that's one of the things that I want to bring up, because there's a couple of logical inconsistencies at the center of the mystery that really bothered me. So, for example, as you were saying, the family feud, which isn't that old, number one. So, like, why has it fallen into, like, why does nobody know about it? It doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
It's like, it really wasn't that long ago, right? So
It's like 100 years. That's a long time.
Everybody has access to those public records. Like, there is no mystery surrounding that kind of interaction. So that's the first one. And plus, like, doesn't all this happen just too late in the whole situation? The father's like, hey, by the way, that guy is related to you. Just a heads up, right? Like, it doesn't actually make sense to me why he holds on to that information for as long as he does. And it makes me feel like, and I'm pretty sure this is accurate, that they did not actually know how the story was going to end when they started writing it. So there's that. There's also the whole conversation with Alice Cooper about her adoption. Uh-huh. And how that was like the worst situation that had ever happened to her in her entire life. And yet for a good portion of the series, she spends the whole time going like, you're giving that baby up for adoption. And I was like, those kinds of moments where they were really manipulating you from episode to episode. Like, the characters didn't retain any kind of logical consistency that built up to a moving moment within the show.
Will you go back and revisit that adoption bit with Alice Cooper and kind of talk a little bit more about that?
So Alice Cooper, right? So Polly is pregnant with Jason Blossom's child, and she's hidden away at this nunnery. And Alice Cooper, Betty's mom, and Polly's mom is like asking her to give up the baby, or they're ashamed of the pregnancy. But we find out later that Alice got pregnant in high school too. and that she regrets most of the actions that she took surrounding that pregnancy. And it's a big reveal at the end of the season. So it doesn't make sense to me that on the one hand, she's willing to conservatively punish her daughter, and on the other hand, she's had this life experience which has taught her about the pain of having an unplanned pregnancy in her.
See, the thing that threw me off though was because, and maybe I got this wrong, but it wasn't an adoption. Her husband, boyfriend, made her get an abortion.
Right. I think you're right about that.
So Polly's dad offered to pay for an abortion for Polly without informing his wife Alice, and then Alice finds out.
And she's like, you made me get an abortion. You ain't doing that to our daughter.
Right. But then there's all of this conversation around, the fact that she aborted that baby or didn't have that baby as being a central piece of the logic of the show, right? Where it doesn't make sense that she would be so upset at her own daughter for a mistake that she also made.
Right. But maybe that's why she's so upset.
Yeah,
it's like, you're supposed to be better than me.
I don't think that that's the issue, though. The issue isn't because it's not necessarily about her not living up to certain expectations, but that she, after that occurs, having known how that is, right, how that experience happens, that she's willing to hide her daughter in a nunnery. Does that make sense? Like
she just read Hamlet too many times.
So I don't think that the logic consistency of the show works for me in that way. The emotional moments that require payoff don't actually give any kind of payoff. So and that happens with me throughout the entire show. Like, I think if they had one more maple syrup monologue, I couldn't follow the emotion of the show. I just sat there and went like, I guess this is happening now.
I did have a little bit of disbelief where I was like, these people are so rich just off maple syrup. I mean,
I totally bought it. I was like, of course, maple syrup.
But they're
dynasty.
not Canadian.
Like, I don't know what it was about it. Maybe I'm just an idiot, but like, I totally bought into it. And then when they're like, he's a drug kingpin, right? We find out Clifford Blossom is bringing all of these drugs in, and he's having the Southside Serpent, the like local biker gang, distribute the drugs to the youths. And I just was like, oh my God, drug lord! I couldn't. I don't know. That was a huge surprise for me. Again, maybe I'm just really dumb sometimes. And maybe I just like the show, so like I bought into their world more easily. The inconsistencies were not as available to me. Now, my question is, did you guys binge this show when you watched it? Did you just like watch all the episodes in like a 48-hour period?
I would watch like 2 episodes a day.
Okay, for how many days? Just like consistently?
Just consistently.
Okay.
Like every day I'd watch 2 episodes.
Okay, Jess?
So I watched the first 4, I think, like separated out.
Okay.
And then I did binge like the second half of the show. I think that my experience with it, and this was the problem that I had with almost everything in the show, everything felt staged. So even the way that the colors were presented in the show, like all of the sort of hyper realized colors, everything about it, the monologue about cheerleading or the discussion of race that the Josie and the Pussycats, like I never sat there and went like, this feels organic, real, and natural to me in a way that makes me feel happy and excited. It was always just like, they're putting on a show. And I could feel the strings at every moment. And I never was immersed in the characters or felt like that they were 3-dimensional enough for me to enjoy them.
Well, that's symptomatic of the fact that the show doesn't, I think, have a lot of substance.
No.
And the reason I would say that chiefly is because it relies on a lot of devices. So I think Jason Blossom's murder, I think a lot of murder mysteries kind of fall under this, where they depend upon you going, well, I want to find out more about the murder. They have this hook to get you. And in the same way that they're hooking you for season 2 to say, who shot Archie's dad? Because Archie's dad gets shot in a diner, seemingly in a crime, but maybe it's not, maybe it was planned. But there always got to be some sort of hook that's trying to get you in, because the characters don't make interesting or organic choices that make you want to watch them.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it's, on the whole, it's a problematic show. I do think that there is something really interesting about a television show in 2017 that is about how small-town America is sort of a disillusioned space, right? Like, that part of what happens to these people is that they thought they were living in one America or one, small good old-fashioned hometown, and they find out, in fact, that it's a dark, twisty, and I think that there are a lot of people that identify with that experience coming off of 2016 into 2017. Sure. So I think there is a lot of appeal to the show. And I think if you're looking for a deeper meaning in the show, that's potentially it, right? That it's about how corrupt our notion of an idealized America is. Mm-hmm.
Well, that's right. That's the whole premise of Betty's big speech at the end at the town anniversary celebration, right? Is she's sitting there and she's like, "We ostracize people when they're no longer convenient for us, and we need to remember who we are and who all these people are in Riverdale and all this kind of stuff." And but that's what that's about, right? She's sitting there and it's the out of the mouths of babes trope, right? She's a kid, she's 15, and she's telling all these adults what's what because she sees things for what they really are instead of being corrupted by age and jaded and cynical, right? Sure. And that's her character, right? She's blonde, blue-eyed, pale. She's got a halo around her almost all the time. That's the point. And so I think I didn't really notice that the first time I watched it. So I think that's a particularly interesting point, Jess, that you're bringing up about the small town America bit.
Right.
Well, yeah, and so it's kind of frustrating because I think that there is a lot going on in terms of, it's one of those shows that I think could have been really amazing, and that they just take all these missteps, like Archie's affair with his teacher. All these really
Archie's
frustrating
affair with the keyboardist.
Yeah, exactly. It's really
Archie's
irritating.
affair with everyone. Well, and I think it's interesting, and I kind of want to talk a little bit about Betty.
Sure.
And kind of talking about who you are. It's like she doesn't know who she is.
No.
But also about consequences. So we have Betty, who is this all-American cheerleader, blonde. I don't think there could be any more Betty Cooper scene than her slowly singing Happy Birthday to Jughead in the most uncomfortable scene in the whole show, lit by candlelight. I was expecting her to say Happy Birthday, Mr. President. That's about what called into my mind at the time, as Cole Sprouse looks on horrified, mirroring my own expression. But that's what Betty sort of thinks of herself as. And then you have the moment with Chance, the football coach's son. So there's Chuck, I believe is his name. So we have this book, very 13 Reasons Why-esque book, that the football team writes down all their conquests for all the women in the school that they sleep with or have some sort of sexual activity with. Some real, some imagined, some just straight up lies, right? And they're going to get revenge and they're going to get it out of him. And rather than be some plucky, comic-esque caper to, sneak into the boys' locker room, they literally, roofie this guy, tie him up in a hot tub while he nearly drowns while they're in lingerie, threatening him. It's horrific.
They're 15.
Right, they're 15. And,
yeah.
And, here's the thing. Slut shaming is wrong and awful and has horrible detrimental effects in society, and it shouldn't be tolerated, but neither should their behavior, and neither should be what they did, and there's no consequences. They're like, girls, don't do that again, slap on the wrist, or we're going to have some minor consequences later, but the show doesn't have consequences. It didn't have consequences for that. Didn't have consequences for Archie. They basically forgot that he slept with his teacher.
Right. Well, and he shouldn't have consequences in that situation because he's the victim.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. And that's part of what's problematic about it is that, I think if the situation were reversed, most people would be completely freaking out about the fact that a 30-year-old was sleeping with a teenager. But because it's a female hitting on a male, we don't consider that to be problematic.
An attractive female hitting on an attractive.
Yeah, remember, you can't
Yes.
rape boys.
Yes.
Yeah.
Not possible.
So, right. So I think that you're right, that a lot of that is really problematic. And it kind of comes back to my point about earlier on how this is just a mess of different television shows because they literally, it's so almost plagiarism because they've ripped that storyline from other teen dramas that I've seen do it better. So much better that feel those consequences and rather than subverting them. And that's my problem with the whole Betty Veronica hot tub extravaganza is that ultimately what happens is that
extravaganza?
That's the best word for it.
It was like a party. I don't know. It was crazy. They they actually end up undermining and undercutting the points that the girls are trying to articulate because they have basically a hysterical, psychotic moment. And I think that that's really frustrating. And it's frustrating, too, in some ways, the way that the show treats the mental health of the women in the show. And we keep coming back to that. There are some things that are compelling about that, but I think that there are also some things that are really problematic. Because, like, we don't really know where Polly, who is in the nunnery, who also shows elements of psychosis, ends up. We also don't know. Betty has some struggles with that and is on medication varyingly throughout the episode. And I think that those are things that we need to talk about. But I want those conversations to be healthy ones. I don't know. And maybe that's asking too much of television. But I felt like half the time I was just sitting there going, what?
Well, Riverdale doesn't want to dive too deep into anything. They want to get the drama, but they don't want to have to do the emotional payout or the intellectual payout for the drama that they create.
It's on the CW, y'all.
And that's why, well, but that's not fair.
Yeah, well, so is Vampire Diaries, so.
Yeah, that's my exact point.
No, but like other shows that have that kind of emotional resonance, right? That are that valuable and that actually are a discussion about what it's like to be a teenager. This doesn't ever come close to me to actually capturing that moment because you kind of kept talking about like these guys are 15, but I don't feel like that dressing up in lingerie and wearing a wig and like torturing a guy, like that wasn't my 15-year-old experience.
Oh, that was my junior prom. That was what I did.
I think
for me, there are other shows that really do capture that experience and highlight the frustration and the struggle, whether they do that metaphorically through the Monster of the Week or in other ways, right? Like this show.
Are you referencing buffing again?
Buffy
twice in one episode,
or even like, and I talked about this a little bit earlier, but I really like Veronica Mars because it falls.
That's not realistic.
But it comes off at the emotional problems of the people that are involved in that show are. And that's the problem that I've had with Riverdale is that I could never track emotionally where one episode was going to begin and where it was going to end. It was always so chaotic in terms of the kinds of conversations people were having with each other. Who was yelling at whom? Who was
yelling at whom?
Yes, throughout the whole show.
Yeah.
So I just never I never caught it. It never engrossed me in the way that I think it was supposed to.
So I'll say two things back to that. First, none of us were 15 in 2017. So I guess that'll be my first thing. I think being 15 now is actually quite a bit different.
Are they torturing men in hot tubs? Is that happening?
I don't know. I'm not 15.
All of our 15-year-old listeners, please.
The second thing that I want to say is that, that's dumb. I don't think 15-year-olds are doing that. I don't think they're drowning football players in hot tubs and lingerie with maple syrup.
Not.
Okay,
right.
One would hope. I'm crossing my fingers over here, but I think it is the CW and. The way I saw that was it's a hyperbolic, overdramatic interpretation of the 15-year-olds do really dumb, irresponsible, stupid, sometimes self-destructive things because they're 15 and they don't know what the heck they're doing.
Right. And I guess for me, so like I have a lot of problems with a television show like iZombie, which also appears on the CW, right? Like there's still some like hefty problems with that particular show, but there's emotional resonance and depth to those characters. And I just felt like this one was a pancake. Like it didn't really make sense in terms of, it was sweet and carby. I don't know. I couldn't.
Sometimes
wasn't
you need
the
a donut,
sugar
Jessica.
honey song
but
played
it wasn't
in there?
even. It wasn't so like another show that I think does this well with like teenage dramas and emotional stuff, and it's on the CW. Jane the Virgin, right? Like these are all shows that have emotional cores that talk about generational conflict and what it means to be a woman and all of these different things. And I just feel like Riverdale never quite gets there. It never quite connects with an audience, and it just all feels so false. And to the victim not having an identity, to Betty yelling varyingly at each of her parents through every episode without having any kind of clear, to the Deus Ex Machina of them finding out and figuring out the mystery in like half an episode at the last minute because they don't have any emotional investment in the case, right? So these were all problems that I felt like the show couldn't really conquer.
Right.
So
now, I won't disagree with that, but I will say that I think Jughead has a little bit of emotional authenticity. In his situation, he doesn't want the film drive-in to close because he lives there. He's dealing with a father who is basically medicated most of the time. His mother left. His mother doesn't want him to come visit her. It was very real in that he was an unwanted person and he didn't
I felt
feel...
genuinely bad for him several times.
Yeah, there were times I think Jughead has, like, for as much as talk about he's a cliche.
He is.
And a character, and the things he says, but his situation and it just is very, not like close to home or anything like that, but just very touching.
Well, it wasn't the carefree days at the sweet life. Of,
yeah. You have to get off the boat sometime, Cody. Yeah, but I will say that I cannot listen to Imagine Dragons Believer anymore without...
Oh, I loved that.
Without seeing Cole Sprouse throw on the Southside Snakes jacket and Betty going, oh my.
So we'll have to see. I mean, I'm interested to follow it into season 2 and see if they kind of try and do the noir thing. I just feel like they need to have a more emotional center. So if I was going to grade this show, I would... I'm going to give it like a low grade. I would say it's an F. So
that's not a low grade. That's an F.
It's a really low grade. So I really didn't like this show. It didn't emotionally. I just didn't get it. And so for me, this one doesn't rank high on my list. And I hope it gets better. That's kind of my feeling on this.
Scott?
So I'm going to give this a C+, B-, because I think that this show fails in a lot of ways and lacks a lot of substance. But I also think that it's fun. There's a certain adventure to it. It's a guilty pleasure. I wanted to watch it. I enjoyed watching it. But intellectually, I think it lacks. So I'm going to give it, a passing grade, but nothing you'd want to take home.
I'm going to give it a B. So that's sort of where I'm at is, I think you guys are right. I think there's not a ton of substance to the show, but that didn't so much bother me because at every moment of the show, I was entertained. And I think that a truly bad show does nothing. It's non-substantive and it's not entertaining. And I think that's a truly atrocious show. But I think that at the very least, this show has the fact that I was engrossed for it and I plan on watching season 2. And to me, that holds some success. Now, again, maybe the reason that I liked it is just because it's the first thing that didn't make me want to jump out of a window that I've seen recently. But it grabbed me and I really liked it and I'm giving it a B.
Cool. That's awesome. All right. So, what are you guys watching this week?
Well, I'm watching Twin Peaks: The Return, the 3rd season, off this Twin Peaks kick that we've had this episode. So, it's about 9 episodes, 10 episodes in. I'm not all the way caught up. And basically, it's 25 years after the end of season 2 of Twin Peaks. We're following up with Dale Cooper and the old residents of Twin Peaks, some new characters, and basically the fallout from that. What I think is really special about it feels tonally consistent with the old show, but very different. It's more of very serious, not as lighthearted, not as quirky. And I think the best part of it is the effects and the aesthetic. It's very Lynchian. There's a lot of tension. Things really captivate you and confuse you and intrigue you. And I think that's just David Lynch doing David Lynch. And so it's been a very enjoyable, excitable ride. After this, I'm going to go watch some more of it.
Cool. So I'm watching It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, which is an old show. It's on its 12th season, and basically it follows these 4 and then eventually 5, starting in season 2, characters who own a bar in Philadelphia who are the worst people in the world. And I know that sounds like I'm kidding, but they're terrible, terrible people. And that's the premise of the show, is following terrible people as they do these terrible things. And when people ask me why I like this show, I say I don't know, because I don't know why I love it as much as I do. But ultimately, I am so impressed that a show that's gone 12 seasons, has already been renewed for 2 more, will have 14 seasons, and 0 character development. The characters from the pilot are the same as the characters in the most recent episode, and that is so impressive to me, and I love it.
That's awesome. So I watched the show Younger.
Hilary Duff's in that, right?
Yeah, she is. And it's great. I really like it. So it's a show about this woman who's in her mid-40s who can't get a job in the publishing industry because she took a break off to go raise her family. So her husband leaves her and she's kind of out of luck. So she ends up pretending to be a 26-year-old. in order to sneak into the publishing industry. And the whole show's premise is about her like lying to everyone in her life about her age.
Is Hilary Duff the 40-year-old in this
No,
scenario?
she isn't. She is the young executive publisher that this woman works with.
Okay.
And so it's this really great discussion about the generation gap. And not only about that, but ageism and women and how female bodies get misused, misplaced, and aren't valuable in society after a certain point. After they can't have kids anymore, And so she has, during this show, she has like a younger boyfriend that thinks that she's 26. And there's this whole relationship where they're trying to like figure out what to do and she has all these conversations with him about youth and vitality and all of this stuff. So, and then later, there's a competitive boyfriend who also is her age, and she's caught between telling the truth to everyone. And so I really enjoyed that show for those reasons. So that's been an awesome one. So
I'm going to say this because Sutton Foster stars in that show. Yeah, no one's going to believe she's 26.
You do. Like, she looks 26.
So
it's crazy. Yeah, they do this makeover on her. It's excellent. And it's really compelling, just the ways that they talk about it. And there are problems to that. Like, she always almost gets caught by her hands in every episode. Or in a lot of the episodes, they're like, you got to do something about that because your hands give you away, man. So there are those pieces to it. But it's a really great show. I've really enjoyed watching it. I think it's actually really funny.
Okay.
Great. So
Cool. All right, well, this time we talked about Riverdale and how it has absolutely no substance, but might still be entertaining to some people. Next time, we're going to talk about The Handmaid's Tale, which is an entirely different animal.
So go do your homework. I'm Jessica K. Richards.
I'm Ashley Zanter.
And I'm Scott Nielsen.
And this is UniversiTV. Make sure to check us out on Facebook or Twitter by liking us at UniversiTV Podcast, or you can email us at universitytvpodcast@gmail.com with your recommendations for future episodes.